Hello, and welcome to the second episode of D-60, where I pretend at you like I know things about stuff. This last week on
Wake Up, Poseidon!
I've largely focused on character artwork. I was very anxious to complete as much of this as I could. Having an idea of the cast of characters and the art assets available to me helps make decisions in terms of design and level structure. Many of the sprites created were completely new, but some of them were reworkings of old ideas. Looking back on both the player and enemy characters, I wasn't quite satisfied. They just somehow looked stiff and awkward. Now, as convenient as pixel art can be, a lot of times I find it much easier to work with the best tools ever invented, pencil and paper. So I've gone ahead and set up a crappy camera phone here to show you a bit of my process. When coming up with the initial concept, it's important to not get bogged down in details, but to stay loose and gestural. Staying loose and energetic will allow you to imbue a sense of motion into your images and concepts. But on the other hand, if you stay strict and rigid, that too will show up in the original concept. Here it's important to just stay loosey-goosey. That's right, just keep loosening up. Looser. Looser. Once I have some images I like, I put everything out in front of me and begin the process of translating it into a soulless medium such as digital artwork. Now, you may have incorrectly gathered from my last video that I have something against pixel art. I don't. It very much appeals to my minimalist nature. Additionally, much of the physical execution of the artwork itself is replaced with decision-making. After all, you typically have a limited resolution and relatively small palette choices by comparison to, say, watercolors on Bristol board. And again, no offense to the medium itself, but it is definitely less physical work to apply color to a relatively small number of squares than it is to render out full images onto large pieces of paper or even large areas in digital works. And this lends itself to the very short time span that many indie developers have to work with. It also lends itself to my own laziness. Once I have the initial concepts more or less rendered out into a few still images, it's time to begin the real work. Drawing lots and lots and lots of slightly varying versions of that same image to give the implication of motion. And it's at this point I like to remind myself of some great advice I once heard. Somebody somewhere at some point told me something I forget. Oh, I remember. It's that the motion is more important than the shape. That is to say, the perceived motion is more important than any individual frame of the animation. Let me show you an example. Take this relatively ugly-looking blob of color, followed by this other image that looks like something not a blob of color. You might think that, well, this won't translate into any kind of perceivable motion, but you'd be wrong. Watch as that... Oh, that doesn't really look very good, does it? But that's okay, because we can play tricks on our own brains. If we were to go ahead and shorten this frame here, perhaps a little more, to the point where we can't even see it, well, it's like our brain tricks us into thinking we can't even see it. Another way we can trick our brain is through long-term context. Each of these individual frames doesn't look like much to see, but in the context of a character who's been on screen for quite a while, well, you get a different story. Perhaps one of the most prevalent issues I have with this medium currently is that I can improve so much after just working on a single character, it makes me go back and look at others and think, my god, that sucks. However, that's the reason I gave myself this strict time limit, to stop myself from going back and perfecting every little imperfection. God, I'm a genius. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for this episode, I think. For those of you who are budding artists, or perhaps terrible programmer artists such as myself, you'll have found some useful tips and tricks here. Until next time.